We are just 1 week away from the Jets' opening matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. Haason Reddick is yet to report to training camp. Seth Walder of ESPN predicts the Jets that they will make it to the AFC Championship game. What is the ceiling for the Jets in 2024? We are joined by NFL Media's Judy Battista. It is a Monday edition of NY Flight Jets Talk, and we are live.
Jets, Jets, let's go.
Jets wide receiver Wesley Walker. Wesley, how you doing today? ESPN writer Mr. Rich Samini, Jets reporter for The Athletic, Mr. Zach Rosenblatt, Hall of Famer and Jets legend Mr. Marty Lyons.
Your host, Connor Law.
Welcome in everyone. We are here Labor Day Monday edition of NY Flight Jets Talk, just 1 week away from the Jets opening matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. Today we are joined by a very, very special guest. And yes, we've had female callers on the show before, but this is our first ever female guest here on the program, Judy Battista of NFL Network. Judy, how you doing today?
Great. Good to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you on. Know how busy you are. Obviously, you just wrapped up all the training camp tours, and we are just 1 week away from the Jets opening matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. You ready to get right into it?
I am. Let's go.
So I wanted to start with a simulation that came out of Seth Walder of ESPN. He predicted that the Jets will make it wild card round, face off against the Miami Dolphins. They will win that matchup. Then they will keep it going and beat the Bengals 27-9. They will make it to the AFC Championship game, but then he predicted that the Jets will lose to the Chiefs. Obviously, the Chiefs are hunting for that three-peat right now. This Jets team is very talented. What do you view as the ceiling for this team?
I would probably agree that the conference championship game is the ceiling. They're a very good roster. Obviously, this all goes with the caveat of as long as Aaron Rodgers is healthy. Yep. But they're a better roster than they were at this time last year, and we all had very high expectations for the team last year. And I think in the division, there are questions about the Dolphins. The Dolphins lost some talent on defense. Questions about the Bills. They lost quite a bit of talent, a lot of veteran talent. They remade their wide receiver room, and obviously the Patriots are going through a rebuild. So all of that combined with the fact that the Jets have a really strong roster, I think puts the Jets in a position to win the division. I think they can win the division. And then it's just, the playoffs are a crapshoot because it just depends on what team you play in which round and what condition that team is in, right? Like, so if you don't have to face the Chiefs until the conference championship round, well, you may be able to get through to the conference championship round. Obviously the Chiefs are tough. But it just all depends on what the matchup is there. But if the simulation says like that they would play the Miami Dolphins, I mean, I sort of like their chances against the Miami Dolphins. And again, all of this comes back to, is Rodgers healthy for most of the season? I'm not talking about, does he have to play all 17? Maybe not, but I mean, he's got to play most of the season for all of this to fall into place.
You mentioned Aaron Rodgers not having to possibly play the whole year, but definitely a vast majority of the year. We can't have something where he's out for, 4 plays, he's done for the season. That brings me to Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor has been a very serviceable backup over his career. Let's say Rodgers is out for 3 games. Do you feel comfortable Tyrod maybe taking the Jets to a 2-1 record over that span?
Well, I think it would depend on who those opponents are in those 3 games, right? I mean, if you're playing some of the weaker opponents on your schedule, maybe he's a very good backup. He's been a very good backup in his career. And it's certainly a better backup quarterback situation than you had last year. But, you would obviously have to lean on the defense as they did so much of last season. But again, it depends on who the matchups would be if he misses 3 games. Keep in mind that until last year, Aaron Rodgers really didn't miss a whole lot of games. Like, he would miss games here and there, but he was he's not somebody that you thought of as injury prone.
Yeah.
So last year was the outlier, or we think it was the outlier. We hope it's the outlier. But, if we sort of assume that he's going to revert to form, like maybe he misses a game or 2, or maybe he's playing while he's banged up, he's done that plenty of times.
Yes.
But, I think the assumption is, assuming there is not some sort of freak thing like what happened last year, that you're going to have Aaron Rodgers for most of the season.
Absolutely, and this revamped offense, 3 new starters on the offensive line, the addition of Mike Williams, you gotta hope that, it's Robert Saleh's made it pretty much clear that he's gonna be healthy for week 1. The question is, will they kind of put him on a snap count, what they did with Breece Hall? But Judy, you were at Jets training camp 2 times this summer. Who were some names that caught your eye during training camp, who made the roster that no one's really been talking about?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I would just the things I noticed. Let me talk about the things I
Yep.
noticed. Brees Hall is healthy right out of the gate in a way that he was not last year. Last year at this time, he was working his way back from the injury, and that made a big difference. Like, you could see how different he looked in practice. Garrett Wilson is a star, and we all know that. I think Malachi Corley, the rookie, the Yak King, as they call it, which I love. I think that's going to be a significant addition. Like, we're all focused on Mike Williams for obvious reasons, and obviously focused on Garrett Wilson, but don't forget him, because I think that's going to be an important part of that offense, and an important, that defenses are going to focus on Garrett Wilson, and so Aaron Rodgers is going to have other outlets. The offensive line looked like it was coming together. And most important, and obviously this is something everybody has talked about, it's not under the radar, but most important, Rodgers looked normal. That's the best way to describe it. He was moving normally. And if you did not know what happened last year, you would not know, right? I mean, he was moving normally and moving confidently. And when Brian Baldinger and I talked to him during training camp, he had said going into camp that there were some things he still had to do on the field to sort of prove to himself that he could still do them, and that it would be okay, that his legs would hold up. And he said then, when we talked to him, and this was, a few days into training camp, that there were fewer and fewer questions in his mind. There was one play during the practice that we were at where, the protection sort of broke down and he had to move and he had to throw on the run down the sideline. And he did it, and he said he wasn't even thinking about it when he was doing it. And only when he got to the sideline after that group of reps did he think, like, I didn't even think about how my leg was going to hold up. And so that was another sort of mental hurdle he had gotten over there. So I think the headline for the Jets is that Rodgers looks normal.
Absolutely, and what I will say about that injury, yes, torn Achilles is a massive injury, but Rodgers was never someone during his career who relied on his legs. He never relied on his ability to, evade pressure, get out of the pocket, and throw the ball. Yes, it certainly helps that you have an ability to do that, but that has never been a main part of his game. And I wanted to get into a comment you made about Garrett Wilson. You mentioned him being an elite receiver from what you saw. First player in Jets history to cross 1,000 yards, first 2 seasons in the league. He played with 6 quarterbacks over that span. If Rodgers is able to stay healthy, could you see something where Wilson is a top 8, top 5 receiver this season?
Yeah, I mean, consider you just said it, like, right? He's had the 1,000-yard seasons with, not to overstate it, like some of the worst quarterback play in the league, and so to get that kind of yardage, and again, at a time when defenses knew he was
He had to be everything.
Right?
Yeah, he had to do everything.
So now you have it, first of all, a quarterback who, is obviously on a different level from anything he's ever played with. And you also have other weapons on the team that defenses are going to at least have to notice are on the field, right? I mean, when Mike Williams is out there, you got to pay attention. So I do think that Garrett Wilson can explode this year. He is so gifted, and what really stood out from last year was his frustration when the offense was not functioning last year. He was there were times after games when reporters would be talking to him where I really thought he might cry. He was so frustrated. And so I think sort of harnessing that emotion and that competitiveness, and then having a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers to get him the ball, yeah, I think the sky's the limit for Garrett Wilson. I mean, he is a star.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying there. He had to be that everything guy, like I mentioned. He had to be the Jets wide receiver 1 in the slot, and he had to be the Jets wide receiver 1 on the outside. And now Mike Williams, 6'4", bigger body, he's expected to be one of the main guys on that outside. Someone who you didn't mention when you were going through the wide receivers is Alan Lazard. It was evident his struggles last year. He's another wide receiver who's most likely going to line up on the outside. Do you think we're in for maybe an Alan Lazard revenge tour if Aaron Rodgers is able to stay healthy? What are your thoughts on Lazard entering the 2024 season?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a revenge tour, but that play that I described where Aaron Rodgers said, the
Yes.
protection broke down and everything, and he had to throw to the sideline. Well, that throw to the sideline was to Alan Lazard, which is a play that, you've seen like 5,000 times in their careers. So I do think, look, Alan Lazard struggled last year. There's no question about it. Alan Lazard struggled in part because the quarterback that he was there to play with wasn't on the field. The whole offense fell apart last year because Aaron Rodgers wasn't on the field. So do I think we're going to see a better Alan Lazard? Yes. Now, he's a year older, and there are other weapons on the field who are going to get the ball a lot more. But, I mean, yes, I would expect a better Alan Lazard because he is not as bad a player as he was last year. And look, I think last year, again, like I think it took it out of him mentally, right? I mean, I think he was just, as were so many of them, I mean, they were just crestfallen when Rodgers got hurt, and you could see the whole thing sort of sag. And so I would expect that we're going to see a better version of Alan Lazard this year.
Xavier Gibson. He's expected to step into, a main slot receiving role for the Jets last year. We saw him a little in the slot last year. What you saw out of him, do you think he's ready to step in that role and potentially be the Jets' number 1 slot receiver?
I do. And I think all of this is going to look different because Rodgers is there, right? I mean, last year you had a situation where the offense was not functioning well last year. I mean, there's just no other way to say it. And so this year, everything will look different, right? The offense is going to be run through Rodgers, and what Rodgers is comfortable doing, the comfort level Rodgers has with these receivers. So, yes, do I think Xavier Gibson can step up and establish himself? Yes, I think they all can. I think this will all look much different. And I don't want to overlook the fact that it will also help that the protection should be a lot better. That was Zach Wilson obviously took an awful lot of the blame for what went wrong last year. And that's fine. He deserved a lot of it, but the offensive line fell apart last year too. This should be a much improved offensive line, and Rodgers having time and not, running for his life should help him also spread the ball around. So I think we're going to see entirely different years from many of the members of the offense because he's there and because the offensive line should be better, much better.
Yeah, I completely agree. Joe Timmett is entering year 2 after a strong rookie season when we saw him fully transitioned over to that center position due to injuries. AVT is returning from an injury. He's expected to have a big year if he's able to stay healthy. Jets add John Simpson, Morgan Moses, an 8-time All-Pro, left tackle Tyron Smith. What's the ceiling for this Jets offensive line? Where do you think they can rank among other offensive lines in the league?
Well, listen, some of them have injury histories, right? I mean, that's the big caveat, that they've got to stay healthy. And the most important thing for offensive lines is cohesion, right? Like playing rep after rep after rep together. But this is a much more veteran group, and that helps. The other thing that will help is all of those young guys who got thrown in last year are now great depth pieces because they've got that experience. They've been in there. And so you've got much better depth on the offensive line. The offensive line should be markedly improved. And again, Aaron Rodgers will help the offensive line too, because he knows how to get away from pressure. You used to say that about Tom Brady was like that. Like Tom Brady wasn't fleet of foot. Now Aaron Rodgers is a much better mover than Tom Brady was. But but Tom Brady knew how to get away from pressure, just slide away from pressure. And Aaron Rodgers knows how to do that. And so that will make the offensive line better too. They're not going to have to hold up as long. He also can get rid of the ball like this. And so they're just not going to have to hold up as long as last year, for example, when the quarterbacks were not sure where they were going. And, there just was obviously not the timing and the chemistry that you need to have a functional offense. So I think, the offensive line will be better. They have better personnel, but they will also look better because of the quarterback playing behind them.
The defensive line, some concerns about their run defense. What is that going to look like? The interior of the line, there are some concerns after Javon Kinlaw and Quentin Williams. I don't understand. A lot of people have been disrespecting Solomon Thomas. I thought he had a fine year last year, but the great thing about this revamped team really as a whole, especially the offense, though, is this defense is going to have time to rest. They've shown these past 2 years they're an elite defense, but now it's not going to be where it's like, all right, 3 and out, you're back on the field. 3 and out, you're back on the field. Literally every 5 minutes. Now they're actually going to have time to rest. Do you think this defense continues to remain elite? Do you think it's a top 2, top 3 unit, possibly even pushing with the 49ers and the Ravens for the best unit in football?
Yeah, I think it'll be a top 5 unit the way it has been the last 2 years. Again, when we talked to Rodgers at the start of training camp, he said like one of his goals was he wanted the defense to be able to play with like a 2-score lead. And when he said that, I was thinking, when he was talking, I'm thinking to myself, like, when was the last time the defense had a 2-score lead? Like last year, I mean, look, the fact that the Jets won 7 games last year under the circumstances is pretty good. And it was mostly because the defense was just like holding everything up. And so imagine that, I mean, first of all, you play defense differently when you've got a lead. Obviously, the pass rushers can just go. But it's just the relief, the mental, not to have that burden on them every game that you've basically got to hold the opponent, to a touchdown to have any chance. Like that just will change that defense. I mean, it's an elite defense anyway. It's a top 5 defense anyway. But I think that to have that weight lifted will allow them to play freer. They're not going to be terrified that if they make one mistake, the entire game is blown up, because you can't afford to give up even a touchdown. And if the offense can give them 2-score leads in a few of these games, which they should be able to, watch out, right? Like then you just unleash a pass rush, and it totally changes the way you play defense. The defense will be fine. I don't really, I mean, listen, it would be a lot better if Haason Reddick comes in. That's a big thing. I'm not trying to minimize that, because that is a thing, and we should talk about that. But I don't worry. I think the defense will be fine.
What I will say before we get into Reddick, I don't know if you saw the stat, but Aaron Rodgers is 81-10 when his defense allows less than 20 points in a game. So this defense can hold up. I think this Jets team is in for big things. And yes, Judy, we're going to address the elephant in the room, and that is Haason Reddick.
Yeah.
Preseason is wrapped up, week away from the Jets opening matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. When does Reddick report, and when do you think the Jets will really get him eased into the system so he can become a focal point of the defense like he's shown throughout past seasons?
Well, I mean, let's start with, when does he show up? I mean, this is one of the stranger situations. Like, there were a lot of holdouts and hold-ins this offseason in the NFL, right? We just got through the Brendan Ayuk one. Like, there've been a lot of sort of strange things around the league. This is an unusual one, though. I mean,
Absolutely.
This is a player, everybody in the league knew he wanted a new contract, which is why the Eagles were willing to trade him. The Jets make the trade. They say they thought he was going to show up. I mean, he showed up for his press conference. And then whether there was miscommunication on either side or both sides, or whether he changed his mind, but I mean, he hasn't shown up and there hasn't been communication. The answer is I don't know how it ends, because the Jets are firm in they are not going to negotiate with a player who's holding out. It seems clear that Reddick is not going to show up without a contract adjustment. Usually you assume in these cases that the player will report because they don't get their game check, right? I mean, it's an enormous amount of money that they're leaving. But nothing about this has been usual. So I can't take that to the bank that he's definitely going to show up. It sort of reminds me a little bit of what happened in Kansas City last year when Chris Jones was in the middle of a contract situation. Remember, he was up in a box sitting next to his agent
for the Super
opener. The defense were struggling. They kept showing him. They kept showing him sitting up there. And lo and behold, after the team struggles, Chris Jones is joining the team. So you sort of wonder if it's going to have to be something like that, that forces the sides to sort of talk to each other and figure out a solution. But It's interesting because in the last 2 weeks or so, Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas have both sort of talked about it. And Robert Saleh sounded much more up. This was early last week, much more optimistic. Like, oh, we'll welcome him with open arms. And, he's obviously a veteran and he knows how to take care of his body. And so he knows how to get ready for the season. And he just sort of made it sound like, I thought it made it sound like he expected that this would, he said, like, we've got plenty of time, which at the time, like, well, not really plenty of time, but you've got a week, like, to get him in so that at least he could practice. Then Joe Douglas talks to the reporters at the end of last week, and he sounded, I thought, less optimistic. Like, he was talking about, like, he has to look at the whole locker room when he is considering contracts for players, right? And if he does a contract for one player, how will that be received by other players? And so he sort of gave you a peek into what he's thinking as they look at this situation. So, it's easy from the outside to say, well, do something and give him something to let him save face and come in. But like, that's what Joe Douglas is thinking, has to think big picture. It's very complicated. And the short answer is, I don't know. I mean, for all I know, he could, walk into the building tomorrow morning and all is forgiven. I mean, whenever he walks in, all will be forgiven because he's a really good player and they need him. They want him. So they will welcome him with open arms. But I don't know when that will be. And then the question is, how fast is he up to speed? And I guess that depends on, is he fully ready to go and how much of a grasp of the defense does he have? Again, Robert Saleh made the point, not only does he know how to keep himself in shape, but he's also been in different buildings and different systems. And so presumably he would, he would pick it up quickly and he would be able to get on the field fairly quickly.
Absolutely. He's had over 11 sacks of his past four seasons in the league. And you mentioned it. He's not showing up till he gets an extension, and Joe Douglas is not willing to pay him until he shows up. That makes a stalemate. Now, the major question is who's going to be the one to give in? And that's the major question that all Jet fans and all analysts are trying to figure out right now. But that said, the Jets are kind of going to have to roll with this group until Reddick shows up. You were at Jets training camp twice. Who do you think obviously Jermaine Johnson's going to be opposite end of Haason Reddick. He's expected to have another big year. Between that combination of Michael Clemens, Takk McKinley, Will McDonald, even Brady McGregor, who do you think is going to be that main focal point who's going to step up?
Oh boy. I don't know. I think they're going to, first of all, I think they're going to piece it together. I mean, you'd like to see Will McDonald sort of, assert himself as the player they think he is, but they're going to have to piece it together. Clearly, Haason Reddick is a big piece of the plan. And so until he gets there, they will use some sort of rotation to make up the difference. I don't want to say that they have an easy stretch of the schedule, but going to San Francisco on Monday night to open the season is tough. There's no way around it. That is a tough assignment. And then you have a short week, obviously. But then the schedule eases up a little bit and you have some teams that are in transition on the schedule. And so that defense might have have an easier time of it for a few weeks there before. And then I think maybe week 5 or week 6, I can't remember the whole schedule. They play Buffalo, which is obviously a gigantic test. But, I think they've got some time to sort of figure things out. Once you get through San Francisco, you got a few weeks there to play around with, again, if Reddick is still not there, to play around with the rotation and, figure out what you got there. One thing I always think about when you have these situations is Bill Belichick used to say, like the first 6-8 weeks of the season, coaches are really still figuring out what you've got and figuring out what works best and what your team does best. And I think that will apply here until Reddick shows up.
Absolutely. And the Jets are, like I mentioned, going to kind of have to roll with the group they have. And if Reddick does not report by week 11, the Jets will still have his rights for next year. So, there's something. It could be something crazy where he just.
That would be bad. That would be very bad.
He reports in week 10 or week 11. So he just plays out the rest of the weeks and then he's gone after this year. But, I mean, we've gotten this far. He's clearly demanding an extension in that range of $25 to $28 million a year. That puts him between between Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. Myles Garrett's getting paid in the AAV of $25 million a year. Haason Reddick's been severely underpaid these past 2 years. I mean, he had 16 sacks in 2022, finished 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. There's no question he's an elite player. It's just, when is he going to get asserted into this defense? And I think the Jets are a playoff team without Reddick. That's my stance. If the Jets get Reddick, I think they have real contention to take on the Chiefs in that AFC Championship game. So that's what I think it boils down to. But Judy, a few more things before we wrap up here. Your interview with Aaron Rodgers at Jets training camp seemed to be a fan favorite among all NFL Network listeners. Where does Aaron Rodgers rank among the players you've interviewed?
Oh, he's a great interview because I was actually talking to their PR people about this after that interview, that he actually thinks about, like, you rarely get cliches from him. Like, you don't, and he rarely just sort of gives you a flip answer and then moves on. Like, he actually thinks about what he's saying, and he thinks about the question. He's a very thoughtful guy and obviously intelligent. I mean, he's a very, very good interview. There's no question. I can't rank them. I'm trying to think, but I mean, he's at the top. I mean, he's one of the most interesting people in the league, certainly. And I think as he's gotten older, has only gotten more interesting, and he's got, sort of more perspective on the league and on other players. And so he's very interesting.
Absolutely. Definitely a polarizing figure for over the past few years, what he's shown. But I mean, he's still one of the top quarterbacks of all time, Judy. One quick thing here. What do you think is a realistic prediction for the Jets this season? I know you mentioned their ceiling you think is possibly that AFC Championship game. How many games do you predict them winning, and how far do you think they realistically make it?
I don't know how many games. I don't have the schedule in front of me. I do think I predict they're going to win the division.
Okay. So probably like 11, 12 games then.
Yeah, whatever that takes, whatever that will be. And then, like I said, if the playoff matchups fall in a favorable way, and again, if everybody's healthy, I do think they can win, some games in the playoffs. It depends on, we have seen this, like, is Lamar Jackson healthy for Baltimore all season? Like, it always depends on these things, right? Like, I mean, can they beat the Chiefs? I don't know, because I'm not sure anybody can beat the Chiefs. I'm picking the Chiefs to win the Super Bowl, so I don't know if anybody's beating the Chiefs. Can they beat the Bengals? Maybe. I think it probably, that certainly depends on, is Joe Burrow healthy? Because if Joe Burrow is healthy, the Bengals are a Super Bowl caliber team. So it all just sort of depends on where the teams are at that point. I certainly think they can, win a game or two in the playoffs and at least get to the AFC Championship game, though, which would be, given what the last dozen years have been like, just be phenomenal, right? That would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely, Judy. I appreciate you joining me here. The final question I ask to every single guest I have on this show: for dinner guests, anyone in the world, dead or alive. It could be someone around sports. It could be a family member. Anyone in the world, dead or alive. Who are you taking to dinner?
Holy cow! I was not prepared for this question.
I do it to every guest on the spot, right?
You're not alone. What did they say? I'm struggling already.
So I've seen some like analysts, some former coaches, some players, and then I've also seen people go in the direction of family members. So you could really do anything.
Oh boy. Abraham Lincoln.
We've seen presidents. We've seen George Washington. We've seen Barack Obama.
Barack Obama would be high on my list. I'm not sure. Would I have a sports figure? I don't know about that. Maybe Jackie Robinson would be really interesting. I'd probably want to talk to Jackie Robinson.
Yeah.
There's a few. Sandra Day O'Connor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, wow.
I've already gone past my 4. So, that's a very tough question. Wow. I gotta get back to you on that. I gotta think about that one.
It's definitely a tough one. I started it about a month or so ago with Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, and then ever since then I've kind of carried it on. But Judy, appreciate you joining me. You got any final thoughts?
No, I think it'll be I think it's okay for Jets fans to have their hopes up this year, because I do think it'll be a good season. So enjoy it.
This is the year, Jet fans. Super Bowl or bust. I'm just joking. If the Jets can make a deep run in the playoffs, I think Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas are back. But the hope for the Jets team is to bring home that Lombardi Trophy. The Chiefs are obviously going to be a tough team to take on as they, just hunting for that three-peat, won back-to-back Super Bowls. Definitely a really tough team. Patrick Mahomes already starting to garner that attention. Is he able to beat out Brady over these next 2 years? But Judy, appreciate you joining me. Everyone, thank you guys for watching, and as always, JTS Jets. Thank you.